Good morning, everyone. We begin at 9:05.
Sorry. That wasn't my plan. Oh.
I was just saying, come on now, Chris, you're not old, you're vintage. People pay.
There you go. It's all about the words you use.
Right.
Well, that seems like a very open question.
Ooh.
Our society doesn't seem to know anymore what, on a very physiological level, like they don't even know the answer anymore.
Right. I think I start with the basics here. It's funny, it's because I must have been raised in the old way in public school, where my biology teacher in 10th grade, he was like, look, guys, there's just a few things we need to cover, and it was all health. It was all LDS. And so it was pretty much like, teach the basics, teach this. If you got a problem, they'll move you on down the road. So what they said was, okay, I got to teach evolution, got to do this. He goes, it's not up for debate. There's a test. You have to pass the test. You get a grade. You move on. This isn't philosophy. I just teach content. You do it. It's like, all right. But Mr. Flanders, he said, he was great. He was like 6'10", basketball coach. He says, okay, so there's certain things that happen, like man and woman, when they come together, offspring happens. He goes, if you look, you still burn happen as a result of that. He said, if you look at me and you're walking down to go get your diploma, and you're like, Mr. Flanders, I just don't get it. He said, I'm going to walk over, take your diploma because you should not be around the rest of the people. And I was like, oh, Mr. Flanders, you're awesome. Although now, he probably couldn't teach me.
Right.
Turn the mic back on so that you too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying not to get kicked off today. We'll see. No. But I did get agitated this week, so we're going to kind of play it by ear on this one.
Why?
I'll show you the story at the end. I put it in. I was like, no, I'm not going to do, last day's order. I'm not going to do anything there. And then I saw this, and I was like, it's one of those things. Hackles went up on back, and I was like, I feel like I'm ready for a fight. This will be good.
Love it.
Yep. Well, good morning. How's everybody doing today? All right, got some fair to middling, doing all right out there. Anybody doing terrible and just want to share it with everyone? Yeah, I'm joking. We're not going to do that. So I'll tell you what we are going to do. Let's go ahead. We'll open up with a word of prayer, and then we'll jump in and answer the question of the day. What is man? So not what is a man. I can't do what is a woman, so I don't want to get sued by Matt Walsh. Hey, Matt, if you're watching, I liked it. So, Heavenly Father, thank you so much for bringing us here together today, Lord, that we could spend time going through your word and answering these important questions in our lives. God, we thank you again. Pray that as we open your word, you would let us have a wonderful time in fellowship once together, sharing these ideas, and Lord, learning more about who you are and what you would have for us. God, we thank you, and in your name, Jesus, amen. All right, so we'll jump in. Today is, what is man? Last week, we went through apologetics and kind of looked at it from the macro sense. And remember, apologia, to offer a defense. And here, to me, this is a very important question. What is man? Is man something that is mere time, space, matter that's come together, evolved from that we don't know what, to an amoeba, has come into be, whether it then be a fish, a monkey, and then what we have current state? And if you've been outside lately, sometimes there seems to be a de-evolution of state. Sorry, that's just a free shot. But if it's that, then what is man and how ought man to operate? And is there an ought? So we'll dive into in a moment. And then now looking at it, if we can define that though, what is really important for us to know, to be able to do, and then how we should live our life in a reasonable and rational manner. Last week we looked at, is our faith in the one true God of the Bible, is that rational? Or is it just something we just bip-bop through life, and like many people would tell you, you just believe because, as I believe Marx didn't quite mean it this way, but it's religion. It's an opiate of the masses. So is it that we are just simple creatures that we can't make heads or tails of the world around us, and so we use God like spackle to cover in all of those areas we don't understand? It's like, well, because God. Or is there something more to it than that? And in our faith, I hope there's more to it than that. If not, I'm making way too much of it. But in this case, answering what is man. Questions before we get started? Thoughts? Gotcha. I'll be back in just a moment. All right. Is this a little better? Oh, perfect. All right. So, sorry for those of you online. We are battling. It's a battle of the bands, and I was coming in second by a long shot. So, with that question, what is man? Just read a quote. I love this was written by Shakespeare. It says, "What a piece of work is a man! How noble in reason! How infinite in faculty! In form and moving! How express and admirable! In action, how like an angel! In apprehension, how like a god! The beauty of the world, the paragon of animals, and yet, to me, what is this quintessence of dust?" So Shakespeare, I believe this was comes from Hamlet, early 1600s. I did okay in English, but not my subject. But I believe early 1600s, when we look here, just in looking at man and saying, what a piece of work is man? How noble. We start to look at the attributes of man, like an angel, like a god in comparison. Is this a fair comparison? Is this something? And as Shakespeare just observed, by the way, his eloquence, impressive. But to me, this is really an important question. What is man? Because it answers not just what we are, but also who and whose we are and how we interact with one another. And is there a logical way that we ought to be, and to be intellectually consistent, that if we believe something, are we acting in accordance with our beliefs? Or are we just kind of making it up as we go? And as people of faith, those who believe in God, how ought we live? And those that don't, how ought we live? Or what are those things that we just kind of left unsaid and unspoken? That to me is wherein the answer lies. So we're going to take a couple crucial topics to address for mankind. So with these, I'm going to pop them up. Ethics. In defining ethics, ethics is based on well-rounded standards of right and wrong that prescribe what humans ought to do, usually in terms of rights, obligations, benefits to society, fairness, or specific virtues. We're also going to take a look at purpose. Purpose is the reason for which something is done or created, or for which something exists. So with these today, we're going to be looking at, as far as man, do we have a case or a foundation or a base for ethics that we ought live by, the right and wrong? Do we have the right to call anything right and wrong? And then also purpose. Does a purpose exist for mankind? And then, are these two something that transcend mankind, or are they simply constructed by mankind? This is important because are these something that predate us? Is it something that we need to adopt as a collective, as a species of man? Should we reasonably accept anything? And if so, what are those reasons? Can we support it? Can we back it up with not just a belief or not just that spackle as I was talking about, but with reason and logic? Question, do ethics transcend mankind, or do we make them up as we evolve? And this gets into the ought versus is. And I'm going to read this from you. It's taken from Ligonier. Those of you that know R.C. Sproul, it stemmed from his ministry. Has, to me, my favorite way of defining what those are in coming to an understanding of the difference between, let's say, an ethic and a moral. So in our society, those get blended very easily, but there is a separation between the two. The English word ethic or ethics comes from the Greek word ethos. The word morals or morality comes from the word mores. The difference is that the ethos of a society or culture deals with its foundational philosophy, its concept of values, and its system of understanding how the world fits together. There's a philosophical value system that is the ethos of every culture in the world. And on the other hand, Mores has to do with the customs, the habits, and normal forms of behavior that are found in a given culture. In the first instance, ethics is called the normative science. It's the study of norms and standards by which things are measured or evaluated. Morality, on the other hand, is what we would call a descriptive science. A descriptive science is a method to describe the ways things operate or behave. Ethics are concerned with the imperative, and morality is concerned with the indicative. So this clears it up pretty quick here. It says, what do we mean by that? It means that ethics is concerned with oughtness, and morality is concerned with isness. So this gets down to, what ought a person do? And then morality is, what are we doing? Case in point, you can take most any topic. Most societies around the world today, I don't know of one that doesn't, but most societies in any culture say that murder is wrong. It is objectively wrong. Don't do it. By the way, if you're in a society and murder's okay, it's going to be a short-lived existence probably. But we would say that ethically, objectively, you ought not murder another person. Now, case of capital punishment. Capital punishment is a state-sanctioned taking of life, but it's after guilt is established. This becomes a moral issue. So can you be ethically correct in not murdering and morally correct because you could take a life for a crime committed? Ought. Huge difference between the two, and yet also they work hand in hand and together, because if a moral ever gets you to contradict an ethic, then you have a definite contradiction there. The two aren't aligned, and one should supersede the other. That if there truly is an ethic, the ethic always prevails because it is ought. What ought we do? How ought we live our life? And as Christians, this may sound fairly simple in understanding. You're like, yes, because as we read through the word, very, very there, that's where, and I'll go ahead and spoiler alert, that's where our ethics come from, that they should stem from the word. Why? Because this is something that if God is who he says he is, that if he created everything, then his ethos, his ethics transcend all of creation. And that is something that we can align to. I did ruin it. I spoiler alerted, but that's all right. So as Christians, what I like to do when I'm looking at something, because especially in our society today, many, many statements are made. And if you're like, I don't hear a lot of statements, go online for 5 minutes. And you're going to be truth claims, things that are made. But there's a lot of times sentences, like things are spoken to. They're like, hey, you should do this, or this is what should happen, or anything. But there's assumptions that are made, like, you agree with me, right? Or we have this common layer of understanding. And this is where it's really important, especially within a belief system, to take a step back and go, well, maybe not. A system that I like to use, and it's not really a system, it's just a couple of words that I put together, and it was like, but it helps me to understand. It says, when I'm looking for clarity about a statement, in order to more fully understand it, use a simple equation and take a look at it. So to better understand a statement, I like to use this. I take the statement, and then I ask if, and then as defined by. And the reason why is this. With the parameters of it, we take a look at the if. That speaks to the purpose. You're like, hey, you should do this. Okay, if what? So that I can better understand what's the purpose for you telling me. And then as defined by or describe that, what are the criteria that you're measuring by? So we'll take a look at it like this. Somebody comes to you and says, hey, you're out on car lot. Hey, you should buy this car. I should buy this car if you want to look cool, if you want to look stylish. Now, these are the things that people leave unsaid. Oh, you should do this if you want to look cool, if you want to blend with society, if you want to do, if, what's the purpose? And then it's defined by, well, really, it's my arbitrary standard that if I can get you to believe, it'll compel you to buy my product. See, that's the ugly part that we leave unsaid a lot of time. It's because I'm selfish and I want you to do this. Or that I'm lacking within myself, and if I can get you to believe this way, there'll be at least two of us and I won't feel bad. Or, so what are those things? And they're not always negative like that, but this helps really get to the understanding of if what? I want you to believe this, think this, do this, buy this. What are those things that are left unsaid? And by getting them to be there, so it's like it would be me if I said, hey, I want to lose 5 pounds. And everybody looks and goes, okay, great. Why? That's commonly said throughout society. Oh, I want to lose 5 pounds. I want to lose 5 pounds if.
Now I have to answer, what's the purpose of me wanting to look 5 pounds? Is it to be healthier? Is it for my own vainglory? Is it for, then I have to define it as defined by, well, then it'll help me feel better. It'll help me think that I look better. It'll. Well, will it really do that? And it allows me to kind of peel that onion back to get to the center of the core. To me, this is very important with ethics because there's, once again, a lot of truth claims that are out there that if we can understand them more deeply, it allows us to not only crystallize in our faith and understanding of how the word applies to our life, but then other assumptions that are made in the world today. Does that make sense so far? Is there... Okay, I've got some head nods. Hopefully nobody's really mad on YouTube, because if so, I can't see the comments now. I'll read them later. Ethics for a Christian. The ought comes from and aligns with God and his word. We find this in Romans 2:14 through 16, and it states, "But in accordance with your hardness and with your penitent heart, you are treasuring up for yourself wrath in the day of wrath and revelation of the righteous judgment of God, who will render to each one according to his deeds. Eternal life to those who by patient continuance in doing good seek for glory, honor, and immortality. But to those who are self-seeking and do not obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness, indignation and wrath, tribulation and anguish on every soul of man who does evil, of the Jew first, and also of the Greek. But glory, honor, and peace to everyone who works what is good, to the Jew first, and also to the... Oh, it's cut off there. Also to the Gentile. That cut off on my slide. Reason why? What we have here, this is stating that we serve a God who sees everything, who knows everything, who nothing gets by, he never sleeps. This is one of those, fortunately I wish I would have looked it up earlier, but with early in Roman history, I believe it was in 2nd, 3rd century, where they were still persecuting Christians heavily. One was said that why Christians ought to be allowed into society. And forgive me if I'm wrong, I'll look it up after and probably ask for forgiveness. I believe it was Justin Martyr, but it may not have been. He made the argument to Caesar. He said, is it possible in Rome that somebody commits a crime and it is not seen? To which Caesar said, yes, that is a possibility that it's there. And he said, but to a Christian, even though I may get it, if a Christian were to commit a crime, who were to steal something, who were to do something, that even though Caesar and his guards may not catch that person, it is not unseen by God. It is seen by him, and it will be punished by him. So as a Christian, I have to live this way because I don't live for mankind or to avoid punishment from man. But I know I serve an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-seeing God who I cannot slip anything by, and thus I must live in accordance with that. These are the things, being able to speak that way, to make that logical argument that says, I live for a God who will not let anything go by, somebody who is sovereign. So those ethics that are there, when we take a look at it, those transcend it. So reason why, as we look at truth resisted hardens the heart. We start to move away from truth. God will use the same standard to judge everyone. He judges us all alike, whether we're guilty, whether we're not. We all stand before God. And one of the transcendent ethics that we really understand that comes from God and we can understand from this is justice. When we go back to what is just, we've all seen injustice in the world. As you look around, there's something within us that's like, that is wrong. I would stop and ask, why? That is wrong if? And then it's defined by what? To go back, we know it seizes us and we go, that can't be, but why is that? To me, worth exploring. So this is why as Christians, we ought to love purely, work hard as unto the Lord, be honest and truthful, and be just. It's because God, the creator of all things, has called and commanded us to do so. He doesn't sleep, he doesn't miss anything, and by doing so, we align our character with him. These are the ethics that we follow. We're not called to be more like man. We're not called to be more like ourselves. We're called to be more like him. Would you rather be more like yourself or more like Christ? Well, I can tell you, like within my marriage, I don't want my wife to have more of who I am. I'm not all that great. By not all that great, pretty terrible on the inside. Can be selfish, can be all of these things. But instead, as I align myself more with Christ, what then am I really offering in our relationship in that case? Somebody who's honest, somebody who's truly caring, somebody who loves unconditionally. Those types of elements that we work toward, aligning ourselves to our ethic, which is the Lord and his word. Please, Mary.
So, also, would righteousness be a good way to define, or a good word to use for aligning yourself with God and his word in pursuing righteousness?
Yes, in pursuing righteousness, yes.
Okay, and one other thing. So Romans 2:14-16, but what is the second passage from? It says 5, 6, 7.
Yeah, you don't have 14 through 16. You have
Oh.
5 through...
Sorry, that was an editing error on my part. That was in Romans, let's see, 5. I believe it was the same. I'm going to look it up.
Excuse me, Brian, you're
Yes.
not allowed to have errors.
All right, Brooke, you're up. Come on up. Let's see here.
14 through 16 specifically refers to God's law.
God's law, yes.
I was just reading it on my app. It absolutely fits in with what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. It is, what's on screen right now is Romans 2, 5 through 10. And then this is 14 through 16. All right. I think 14 through 16 got cut off at the bottom there.
Yeah.
So whoever's building these slides, I'll tell you what, that's it. Docking that person's pay. But with this speaking to, do we serve a God that is who he says he is? To me, the answer is yes. And if he shows himself true, if he shows himself, which he has for the whole of mankind and continues to do so, is this a sound foundation with which to lay on our ethic to say, this is what ought be? If we take a look at something, let's say, for ethics, we're either a naturalist, and we'll use atheist, and we'll use the term, once again, atheist, negative God, those who say that there is no God that exists, that there can be no ethos that outside of the world that we have today that is imbued upon man. Either that, or to make a logical case that an ethic transcends what we have. So before let's say the Big Bang, did anything exist before that? And if so, what are those ideas, ideals, or ethics that then one ought to follow, which is very different than is. What ought you, and then establish why. For the Christian, we can say that the creator of the universe said, this is what ought be. So as far as with justice, with love, with take those ideas, those ethics, that's to which we trace our lineage for our ethics, transcending creation. Without that, to be able to live somewhere and to tell somebody not just what I ought to do, but because that's for me, this is what you ought or what everyone ought do. Immanuel Kant came up with what he called categorical imperatives. With the categorical imperative, it says, act only according to the maxim by which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. So if I said, in this case with Kant's categorical imperative, we also call it in business or just in life, it's called the worst enemy power. You're like, I should be able to do this. Okay, would you give that power to your worst enemy? If the answer is no, then don't do it. Then you shouldn't touch it as well. It's a great maxim. Does it transcend our existence? And if so, how? It's a good idea. I mean, if I wouldn't want you to have that power over me, should I then seek a way to establish that power over you? Well, ethically, we can understand this. The difference is, and this is what becomes truly important for me when I came to understand this, if this is the case, and let's say we came from evolution, we evolved from microbes or rock or wherever we came from, that once again, we have to span life that I haven't been able to do yet. If we came from there, what ought should I have over me? As defined by who? I can't find it. Now, this is a good idea, but am I bound by it? Because the word of God, as we just read, says, everyone who has ever lived is bound by these. I see all, I know all, I do all, and as the judge, this is what I judge. But here, If there is no afterlife, if there is nothing, what are you really bound by? To me, that's a logical question. And as we move to, let's say, from a more humanist approach, and I've taken this, I believe it was a site, it was in the UK on humanists, and I just did a copy paste that said, humanists believe that origins of morality lie inside human beings. They do not believe morality is handed down to us from an external source. Instead, it evolved through our nature as a social animal. The reason to be good is because of the impact actions have on other people, animals, and the planet. The function of morality is to try to improve the welfare and flourishing of human beings and other sentient life in the here and now. They believe we should make our ethical decisions based on reason, empathy, and consideration of the consequences. So I would do this, and this is just naturally how I tend to operate. I'm going to remove God from my thought pattern. And then I would look at this and say, the reason to be good. Define good for me. Good is defined by what? Make me see your version of good. Can you build a case that says this is good that I ought align to? And if so, what does that look like? The flourishing of human beings, what if I don't care? They believe we should make ethical decisions. I would ask, based on what? What are your ethics? Empathy. Why is empathy important? You're like, well, in order to, this is the if. Well, empathy is important if we want to have a society that can coexist with one another. What if that is not important to me? Why does your ethic transcend mine, or your morality transcend mine? I need a logical case to do that if we are to build any sort of a coherent belief system. These are elements that are assumed that it's like, why? Yeah, empathy, we ought to have empathy. Now, when we read that, doesn't that sound good that we should all have empathy? That we should all do this and that we can build together? The answer is yes. Once again, I'm going to skip ahead and I can tell you exactly why that is. Because we're all created in the image of God. And as that, this then is stepping over into that side of our argument that these are our ethics, this is our morality because of a creator. So this slides a foot over and says, I know you inherently feel that way. I know this is an image bearer of God. I'm going to take this collateral here and move it to my side of the line. This is where, to me, it becomes important that if you ever have the opportunity to discuss somebody who doesn't believe in God, we can kind of say, no. You can't borrow from this to get me to believe this, to construct this. Now, I'm willing to absolutely listen and say, here's your ethic, here's this. Now, define for me why empathy is important, but stay on your side of the line. There's no transcendent ideal unless you're saying that there is and that empathy existed before the whole of creation. If so, I'm willing to go with you on that, but explain it to me so that I might understand, because I can't now. So here it's defining, where do we get our beliefs from? Where do they trace back to? What are the roots for ethics and morals? Because some of these sound good, that we ought to build, that we ought to take care of life. I absolutely believe that as well, but I can tell you why, as compared to it's a good idea. In our consciousness, we know that, unless you're a sociopath or a psychopath. But as just normal, everyday people, we can see that and align with it, but where does it grab its roots from? So in here with Christianity, we would take a look. As far as for our ethics, God, the eternal being, has given us his word in order that we may know him, align ourselves with who he is, and interact with others in the world around us. His word is perfect and transcends the natural laws and morals of man. This is the core of what we believe. These are the important part. If I look at the word of God, and this is really important, and unfortunately I'll go ahead and say it, in a lot of churches around the United States, don't follow exactly that. They want you to feel good while you sit there. This may be breaking for some people, but when you really start going into the word, you know what you find is you start to overlay the word with who we are and our beliefs. It hurts, because I know some of the natural assumptions I made that I'm really important. Those fall a little short sometimes when looking at the word and when God says, this is who I am, this is who you are, and here's what you ought to do. When I start to feel really good about myself, if I walk down the road and I see somebody who's like, oh, doing better than that person, that becomes a moral relativism where I look and go, better than that person, great. The way I heard it described is, well, then what you do is take and overlay the life of Christ over my life, That's a real measurement, because I'm not called to be like the other person or better than the other person, no matter who they are. I'm called to be like him. That's like me bragging that I can do a vertical jump, and I can vertical jump higher than the next person. I'm like, haha, I did it. Well, what if the goal is to land on the moon? I'm gonna brag that I can vertical jump 4 inches higher than somebody else. But when it comes to the real measurement, how do I pale in comparison to what I ought be? So this is where we take a look and say, this is what we believe and why. So with atheism, ethics and morals have evolved from man and are subject to cultural acceptance by others or another standard that may be subjectively applied. The reason why here is you will find different groups that are either atheistic in nature, and this is once again for more of a non-believer versus a different faith system. Because it would be very easy to sit here with somebody who's a follower of Islam, a Muslim, somebody who was a Hindu, somebody who is Buddha, to say that there is this law that came from God or the gods that we worship, and they would say, yes, now we can describe which religion makes more sense, which belief system makes more sense. But they would wholly understand that. For a Muslim, they would say, God's law is absolute. We can agree on that. Now we can get into it as far as who is God, what are his attributes, those types of things, which book, all of that. But to hear say, what are those belief systems? Within atheism, and I would say just a large body of those who are non-believers, there are different belief systems. Some would just outright say, there are no morals. There are no objective morals. Okay. Some would say there are some, but they're constructed by man. It's dependent upon a culture. There's just a broad variance of in between. So with these two, please, Brooke.
Well, I was going to say, we were talking about this the other day. Like, if someone doesn't have God, sure, yeah, you can admit that being outwardly, a liar and stealing is wrong, but then who are you behind closed doors, when no one's there?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, the biggest question is because obviously, your selfishness will be, heightened in those moments. And I think that's, the scary part, is because you could totally put on this front of, okay, be nice, or okay, do what socially you have been trained to do because you don't want to be arrested. But then who are you when no one's around?
Yes. Yeah. It is that consistency of your belief in that, are you the same person in public as you are in private? So if you are in public, you look like you float on air, you can walk on water, you can do all these things, but really in behind closed doors, you're a terrible person. I think the question would be made then, which life are you lying in?
Well, it's crazy because then there's no repercussions too, because if you don't have God as your belief system,
Mm-hmm.
then there's really no, you're never convicted of anything behind closed doors.
Mm-hmm. That yes, if you are never convicted, with inside an internal conviction behind closed doors, and we can sear our conscience. Can you live that way? Absolutely. And then my question would be is, if you don't believe in God, and you really believe that way, why are you good when you go outside?
Yeah.
That seems to me to be wholly illogical, doesn't it? Where I would look and go, to me then, a person who would have been really lived his belief, and this is where we're going to talk about it, intellectual consistency with a belief, would have been Genghis Khan, Temujin. Now, in his life, and people would go, why? He really lived his belief. During his lifespan, he killed approximately 1/10 of the planet. Yeah, he put in the work. He did a lot. He also tried to populate to make up for that other difference. But you would look and go, was he wrong? And if so, why? Is it relativism where the people that he killed didn't like it? Well, if there was more people that were on his side than weren't, then how could he be wrong? Or might he be wrong? And what would we trace that back to? Here, once again, we could go to ethics that transcend mankind and would say, no, we ought not live this way. So the atheistic view needs to draw capital or collateral, once again, from the Christian side in order to have a claim, merit, or reason for existing. To what could you anchor any ethic or moral that could not be displaced by somebody offering a different view using the same argument? You're on equal footing, and there's objectively no higher ground that can be obtained. Like, Brian, you should live this way. And I would say, no, I shouldn't. Well, it would be good for you to do this. Well, you can't define what good is or good according to you. I also have good according to me. We're on equal footing. But to have that higher ground, this is where you go, what is it that beyond man, or beyond you and me, at least in difference, that we would say, this is why I believe the way that I believe, not just for me, but why you should as well. And this is as a Christian that we can say that I believe this because there is a being that is higher than me. There is God who created this, and to which I align in the same that you would, because he is above you as well. And this is the whole for mankind. I watched the debate, and this is where you could see this in action and why it becomes important. Now, be careful how I word this one. It says, in a debate between Jeff Durbin, who we looked at some of his work last week, and Jared Anderson, to which Jeff asked Jared, and once again, Jeff is a Christian speaker and apologist, and then I believe Jared Anderson, I want to say was also a teacher, humanist, atheist, so both are very intellectual. It says, in the debate, Jeff asked Jared if harming children in a particularly what we would call an evil manner is objectively wrong. To his credit, Jared answered not objectively wrong, but intersubjectively wrong. There's no objective ethics from which one could say anything was objectively wrong. So to his credit, and he used a number of what we would call egregious sins against children. In this case, it was also against women, and says, are these acts objectively wrong? To which Jared said, no, there is no objective wrong. Now, it's intersubjectively wrong based upon our cultural conversation and what we have decided is moral within our society. So the inference there, now you would say, oh, okay, so pretty much you get to the same place. The answer is no, it's not the same place. We decide it's wrong, but what if you get 50% plus one to say that it's okay? Then what does that mean? Each of those elements are okay. Is that what we would say? No. Please.
I was just going to say, which is kind of where they're heading us right now in our country, to that 51% changing our country so that we accept things that are morally not right. So that's where the United States is headed. I mean, they're trying really hard.
Yes.
And unless we fight back,
I like that. You're already at the end of where we're headed today. Yes, very true. And I think for us, the reason why, let God be true and every man a liar. In that morality argument that if in the United States, Evelyn, to your point, that if we take and everybody says, well, no, everybody else is doing it, you need to believe this way, and we remain silent, it looks like that majority has moved that direction. And what do most people do? We just bow our heads and walk along and move in line. But is it ethically right? And if not, should we say something about it? Should we do? Yes. Yes. So for me, it's also important to note, we're also made in God's image, and he created us with a conscience. Even though we try to escape it by creating our own systems of belief, we cannot escape who we are and how we're made. We're each born with a conscience. The reason why, we are made in the image of God. That is there from the moment. And the way that I always like to look at it is one of my favorite authors. You'll see his work a little bit later too, G.K. Chesterton, as you know, that he just was floating a thought out there. And during creation, when God was forming the earth, that God was doing this, and with man, he breathed into man's lungs. We always look, and for me, and I'll say we, I'll just say I always look and went, oh, we kind of set it in motion and things just kind of happen naturally. What if they don't? And Chesterton's thought was, what if every blade of grass, every flower that opened, every tree still did so by God moving his hand, by him being as engaged with his creation as he was on the first day? For every baby that's born, that first breath, God still breathes that air of life into, bestows upon us a conscience. I start to look at creation a little bit differently. I'm like, wow. When you look at, fortunately, we're in Arizona. Maybe not so fortunately this week because it's going to get hot. But to go outside and look, God's grand wonder in a sunset. You can see the beautiful crimsons, the yellows, the oranges, the golds, all of these colors, which I love. We go out every day, and look at the sunset. By the way, if you are here, it's the dust in the air. So if you're also sneezing and you're taking all those allergy meds, that's what it is too. It's the dust in the air. But it creates all this glory and wonder and beauty. But for what? about a half hour, and then it's gone, and then it begins anew the next day. Just wonderful. We can engage with that. Click, please.
Let's take a guy in Chicago where they shoot everybody, or not everybody, but does he feel bad about that? Or not?
He might not. He might not. And can we see?
His conscience.
Can we see? And that's a great question. If for a person who can commit these acts, why? And how can they live with themselves so easily? Is what can we sear our consciences with a hot iron to where, once again, like with scar tissue, it's still skin, but there's no nerve endings in there anymore. You can't feel it. So, and in that way, can we sear our conscience to a point that we're not aligned with that anymore, that we can continue to sin, we can continue to fall and pursue that? Now, for us as image bearers, it is wrong. But in other belief systems, is it wrong? And if so, why? Let's take a look at another question here real quick. What is my purpose in life? Who's ever asked that question? Or maybe you've been walking around and people are like, what is my purpose? How many people are out there, if you go online, like, here's my purpose. I've found my purpose. This is my purpose. Is that a reasonable question? Is it a rational question? Well, let's take a look. And if so, why? Because, once again, I like to have a foundation. Is it? For Christianity, we're made in the image of God. In Genesis 1:26, what was man meant to do? To keep the garden and name creation. That when God placed man in the garden, it was for the purpose of tending the garden, and then also to name all of creation. So God said, name the animals. He took an active part in God's creation. And also from Genesis 3:8, for communion with God, when he came to walk through the garden in the cool of the day. This is what's called original intent. What is the original intent of mankind? And to me, this becomes very, very important for us because we're created to commune and work with our Creator God. This is the original intent of man. And at the fall, we sinned. We were separated from God and have this torn edge within ourselves, also called we've got this gaping hole in the middle of us, and we don't know why. That he's the only one that can fit. And how many of us out there are searching for something to complete this purpose with a substitute, whether it's vice of any flavor, spirituality, work, etc. Nothing can fulfill it except for him. That the original intent of mankind was to stand face to face with God, to walk with him in the garden, to be actively engaged in his creation. But at the fall, what happened was a separation. It was very similar to a jagged paper tear. For us, there was that separation that took place. So what do we look for? How many people out there are looking for it, whether it's like, I don't know, but I know I'm missing something. I'm haunted within me. And this, Mary, is for you from Blaise Pascal, one of my favorite thoughts in this line and why he believes this to be so with our original intent. It's taken from Pensees, I believe number 409. It says, the greatness of man is so evident that it is even proved by his wretchedness. For what in animals is nature, we call in man wretchedness, by which we recognize that his nature being now like that of animals, he has fallen from a better nature, which was once his. Who is unhappy at having only one mouth? And who is not unhappy at having only one eye? Probably no man ever ventured to mourn at not having 3 eyes, but anyone is inconsolable at having none. This is taking away and saying, have you ever pondered, you're like, oh, I'm just really sad, I only have one mouth. Man, only one. Well, probably not. Why not? We were created with one mouth. But what about our eyes? As we look, and as he says, well, you're not unhappy if you only have one eye. If you once had 2 eyes and you lose one, I don't believe I've ever heard one person say, my life is so much better now that I got rid of that pesky other eye. No. But how many of us are like, oh, my life's just garbage. I can't seem to do the things I want to do. Why? I don't have 3 eyes. Well, that sounds odd to us. The reason why is we weren't created with 3 eyes. That wasn't ever the original intent. But anyone is inconsolable at having none. If you had your sight and lost your sight, you're inconsolable. The reason why? This is what you know. This was the original intent, the creation. And for Pascal here, his thought is that why do we search in our nature knowing that we once had something? He says, who but a deposed king would miss the throne? I wouldn't miss not being on the throne. Would I like to be? Yes. By the way, I'm letting you know you shouldn't vote for me to be king. It probably won't go good for the rest of the country. But in the same way, I don't miss it. Why? I never had it. But if you were once a king and you were overthrown and cast out, would you not miss it? Because it was something you once had. And for us, why do we seek the spiritual? Why do we seek something greater than ourselves? It's not because over the course of evolution that we went, well, there has to be something greater than me. It's because we once had that communion with God and we were separated from it. How about purpose as we look for whether it's an atheist, a naturalist, a nihilist? I say nihilist, by the way, I'm not nihilist because I don't know if it's from soccer or football, but when you lose 3-0. So I usually lost on the team. But I've heard it nihilist. This is taken from Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. The Übermensch shall be the meaning of the earth. I entreat you, my brethren, remain true to the earth, and do not believe those who speak to you of supraterrestrial hopes. Behold, I teach you the Übermensch. He is the lightning. He is the madness. Behold, I am a prophet of this lightning and a heavy drop of the cloud. But this lightning is called Übermensch. Has anyone heard the term Übermensch before? We would translate it loosely here in English, Superman. The Übermensch. Unfortunately, this was written, I believe, late 1800s, but the idea of which was taken by a little-known world leader. His name was Adolf Hitler. And he transcended that, the Übermensch, to be the Superman or the superior race. Not the way necessarily that Nietzsche had written it, but the idea transferred very well to a person's belief, which will come into play later on today. Spoiler alert. How that comes over. With the Superman, what is the Superman? The attributes of the Superman that he writes about: independence, self-realization, personal liberation, self-determination, psychological completeness, and health. You are a superior being. Why? You've shed your thoughts, you have shed your beliefs, you have shed that preconceived notions, and you have become independent. You realized and rationalized who you are in yourself. You're personally liberated. You're not bound by the confines and the conforms of any belief system. You're psychologically complete and healthy, so that you are the pinnacle of, in this case, evolution. As we take a look at creation versus evolution and purpose, man's purpose is found in God, as he is the only one whose purpose lies within himself. What that is everyone else, our purpose doesn't lie within ourselves, but in him. Our original intent was to be in communion with him, and until we are, we will never be fulfilled or truly satisfied and complete. The reason why is that original intent is missing. That communion with him is missing. If not, it becomes that specter that haunts us the entirety of our life, that there's always something out there a little bit more. Otherwise, money would satisfy, drugs would satisfy, promiscuous living would satisfy. That's one of the things that I love most is you say, well, if you're a Christian, then you sacrifice so much, you give away all of your fun. Okay, peel that onion back. Let's take a look at it. If that were not the case, or logically, would not drug addicts and prostitutes be the happiest people in the world because they are living at a level that most of us will never seek to attain? It seems to be illogical because I don't think that I've ever met drug addicts and prostitutes, of which I've met both and worked with heavily in the 90s over in LA. Nobody ever said, I really love this lifestyle. I've heard I'm bound by it. I struggle with it. This will kill me. I hate it. But I've never heard I'm living my dream. That's not the case. So is there something more? Within evolution, summed up, I believe, best by Richard Dawkins, that says, who's a famed atheist author, that says, there is no good, there is no evil, only blind, pitiless indifference. Well, it's so dark. Now, here's the thing. When Nietzsche, who is a nihilist, he wrote his words on the Übermensch, also understood that if you strip away, he believed Christianity to be the bane of Western civilization, that was bound by it and needed to be free from it. He also understood that when you took away, you stripped away Christianity, You create a vacuum. And when you do that, what is mankind left with? You have nothing, thus nil. He worried that society would collapse within itself. He called it the yawning abyss. So it's this dark black hole that mankind then must say, I shed myself from this belief in God. Now what must I embrace? And it's nothingness. That there is no purpose. There is no God. There is only this life and what you have. There are no absolute ethics. These are ideas that we can follow. But this is what it is. So you either go one of two ways. You go super dark and you're just like, there's no reason for living. And that is right. That is logical to believe that if you are a nihilist. There is no reason for you to live. There's no reason for you to die. There's no reason for anything. Now, so you have that. Or you have people that then just say, I will no longer be constructive and I am just going to pursue vice all the way to the end. Is that wrong? If so, you have to say why. These are the things. He even worried about that and was like, okay, so you create the ideals that keep people from sliding to a logical end. But here is a very clean statement. There is no good, there is no evil, only blind, pitiless indifference. You're like, I just don't think the world cares. It doesn't. Why? Pitiless indifference. It's one to say that. Can we live that way? A couple of questions. How should one reasonably and rationally live if there's no life after death and no foundation for ethics? How would we live? Why would you live that way? Well, I think we should be good to one another. Okay, it's an idea, but let's bat it around for a second. One, what is good? As defined by what? How do you define it? And then say, why? Which I think we've batted around a little bit today. Why would you believe that? Like, well, I think we just get along better in life. So what? But then within us, as a Christian, why would you say this? How should one live? How ought one live? What ought we believe? How about this? If there is no God and we evolved, is there a foundation for either ethics or purpose? To me, I would say no. Now, there's beliefs and ideals that we can put in. Why? And it comes down to this. I do not want to be held to account by God, to admit that there is a God, but yet I want to live under the cover of what that type of belief system would offer. That one ought be just. One ought be honest. If there are no ethics, why should you be honest? Why is lying bad? Why do we teach our kids not to lie? Because that, to me, that aligns with the character of God. God is not a liar. Why do we teach our kids to do these things? Why do we teach them to share? Why do we teach them charity? Why do we teach them to give? Why do we teach them those elements? Because they align with who God is. So even Nietzsche, this is where we talked about before. And the real question to me is this. If there is no God, why reach over to the Christian ethics and morals to look for meaning? There really is no meaning. Believing this way would create intellectual consistency. If we believe in blind, pitiless indifference, can we be intellectually consistent enough to say, I don't want to live in a way that borrows from this side, but yet proclaim this openly? Can you live and look at the world and say, I will live and accept this? Many say no. To then ask, is there a purpose? No. It doesn't feel it. The reason why? It's contradictory to our nature. It's contradictory to our conscience. As much as we try to push that down and stop it, because once again, we're image bearers of God. We were created in his image, even those who don't act like it. So what do? We try to find a substitutionary piece. When did this start taking place? I would go back to Adam and Eve after the fall. So don't get me wrong. We all come by it pretty honestly. We're all sinners. But can we look and say, at least reason through to say, this is why, for me, I believe in God. Because I would tell you this, if God was not true, I would be a nihilist. I absolutely would, because to me, that's rational. I would not look at ethics and say, well, I believe in your system. No, there is no system to believe in. Anything like that is an opiate to the masses. Anything like that is a weakness of thinking and saying, well, I'm going to try to construct something where it's not. It's not. It's not. then can I live that way? For me, this is why I found the word to be true, continue to do so, and the more that I learn, the more that I pour myself into the word, I find that as I align myself there, it only confirms not only what I already know, but what is true. And I'm going to do this one more time, so sorry for the word wall. It's not as bad as last week, though, I promise. But it comes from Chesterton, and I like it. It talks about the creation and the evolution of man. And in this story, as he sets it up, it's from the book The Everlasting Man. He ties in, and he talks about a kid going through and looking at ancient cave paintings. The chapter is called The Man in the Cave. He's walking through, and he's got his teacher that's there with him, and he finds bones of ancient men. He finds bones of animals. And remember the concept of evolution, where we all came from in macroevolution. And Chesterton elaborates on this, some from the teacher's perspective, and then also some from the child's perspective. It says, in looking from the child's view, but nowhere would he find one finger that had traced one significant line upon the sand. Nowhere one claw that even had begun to scratch the faint suggestion of a form. To all appearance, the thing would be as unthinkable as all those countless cosmic variations of forgotten eons, as it would be in the beasts and the birds before our eyes. The child would no more expect to see it than he would to see a cat scratch on the wall a vindictive caricature of the dog, which we know cats would because they're jerks. That's how they live their life. The childish common sense would keep the most evolutionary child from expecting to see anything like that. Yet, in the traces of the rude and recently evolved ancestors of humanity, he would have seen exactly that. It must surely strike him as strange that men so remote from him should be so near, and that the beasts so near to him should be so remote. To his simplicity, it must seem at least odd that he could not find any trace of the beginning of the arts among any animals. That is the simplest lesson to learn in the cavern of the colored pictures, only it is too simple to be learnt. It is the simple truth that man does not differ from the brutes man differs from the brutes in kind and not degree. And the proof of it is here, that it sounds like a truism to say that the most primitive man drew a picture of a monkey, and that it sounds like a joke to say that the most intelligent monkey drew a picture of a man. Something of division and disproportion has appeared, and it is unique. Art is the signature of man. That if we evolved, would not the most evolved monkey have started drawing pictures? Because the most simple man did. We can go back in archaeology and see across any continent, the earliest ones, we go to the caves, we can see this, early graffiti, it's there. Then it was cool, now it's not so cool, so please don't graffiti everything. But we can see that. But what is he saying here? That man is different in kind, not degree. We did not evolve. Art is a signature of man. The reason why? That with that, that was something given by God. It was not given to the rest of creation. It was given to man. It says in this passage, he's describing the scenario which the young man goes through, the bones of men. Man is capable of the greatest achievements in art, music, architecture, etc., because we were created and God breathed life from the Creator. That was given to us, that he is a creator. That is the image. When we see music, when we see art, when we see those pieces, those are the ones that we can look and say, this comes from God. That's a remnant that is left with us that we continue to use. What do you see oftentimes? The tortured artist. We see the artist that's there, that's the painter, that is tortured. We see musicians that are tortured. Why would you not? Now, were you not to believe in and understand the one true God, that you would say, through my art, as Rembrandt did, through my art, this is a way that I bring glory to God, as compared to working in a manner or working in a medium that was given by the Creator and yet being divorced from the very one that you draw from to create. How maddening. How maddening. So as we take a look here, in conclusion, and almost conclusion, it says, the God of the Bible not only provides us with an objective, transcendent set of ethics for which we can align and live by, he also provides us the purpose for our lives and the ability to truly know ourselves through knowing him. And this is something that as we look, belief in God and faith is wholly rational. We have transcendent ethics. We have purpose. We have not only that, a reasonable and rational understanding of how the universe around us came to be and how life was created. Those all make sense. Without that, what do we draw to? Meaninglessness, purposelessness, other than what we can create for ourselves, only to get through this shortened time. So with that, we serve the one true creator, the God of the universe. Now, there was something that I came across this week that if I could share with you, I said I wasn't going to do a last days alert until I saw this yesterday. Israeli futurist and author predicts AI will soon write a new Bible. Said in a few years, there might be religions that are actually correct. Yuval Harari claims, rejecting the Bible as truth. So when you hear that, and this is where, once again, if, in a few years, there might be religions that are actually correct. What is the inference there? There are no religions that are correct. Yuval Noah Harari, an Israeli author, professor, and advisor to the influential World Economic Forum, believes AI is not only on the brink of creating a new religious text, but one that Harari asserts might actually be true. Harari made the stunning claim that during a conversation on AI, the future of humanity with photojournalist Pedro Pinto last month in Lisbon, Portugal, in which he compared the rise of the AI computer power with other history-altering inventions like the printing press. But unlike the printing press or its Gutenberg Bible, Harari explained, AI has the potential to come up with an entirely new ideas distinct from prior human development. The printing press printed as many copies of the Bible as Gutenberg instructed it, but did not create a single new page, he added. It had no ideas of its own about the Bible, which is good. Is it good? Is it bad? How to interpret this? How to interpret that? AI can create new ideas. It can even write a new Bible, seemingly casting aside millennia of claims of divine inspiration by not just Christianity, but all the world religions. Harari said AI could fulfill the religious dream of a book written by superhuman intelligence. Throughout history, religions dreamed about having a book written by a superhuman intelligence, by a non-human entity, he said. Every religion claims all other books of the other religions, they, humans, wrote them. But our book, no. It came from superhuman intelligence. Harari then suggested that despite the world's 3 Abrahamic faiths, comprising more than 3.8 billion globally, by the way, Abrahamic faiths, just so we know, we're talking Judaism, Islam, Christianity. AI might finally deliver what he purports would be correct religion for the masses. In a few years, there might be religions that are actually correct, he said. Just think about a religion whose holy book is written by an AI that could be a reality in a few years. Harari, who is gay and is the best-selling author of *Sapiens: A Brief History of Humankind*, 2014, and *Homo Deus: A Brief History of Tomorrow*, 2016, has called the Bible a book of myths and just stories. In a column for The Guardian last October, Harari pointed to how young children in Israel hear about the biblical accounts of the Garden of Eden and Noah's Ark long before they are taught about the Neanderthals or cave paintings. To gain some freedom from these narratives and behave differently, we need to understand how they were created and spread in the first place, Harari wrote. Otherwise, we will never see them for what they are, just stories. He's also described Christians as having locked themselves inside a self-reinforcing mythological bubble, never daring to question the factual veracity of the Bible. So through this was an interview, I believe, that was done last week. So what it's saying is we're going to create a super AI, and this super AI, as compared to doing what it does now, which is to take all of this information and then create it, cross-check it real quick, and spit out an answer. Does a huge amount of data crunching and processing. What he's saying now is it's going to create new thoughts and will create an actually correct religious book.
According to who?
According to who? Yeah, and who's feeding the computer from what data is it drawing to make sure that it is correct? Well, let's take a look. I always like to dive in just a bit. So there's a document that was produced, a white paper that was produced by the World Economic Forum in 2018. It's the role of faith in systemic global challenges. And as we look through, let's see if I can do it. as you start to look through the side, through the contents and why I thought it was important to put there, but apparently not important enough for me to be able to read it on my screen. I'm going to see if I can here real quick. The introduction and what faith can do for our global systemic challenges. Can religion make economic growth more fair? The inference is there is that current economic growth is unfair. The faith factor in employment, skills, and human capital. 4 reasons why climate change can't be solved without religion. The faith factor in the global financial system. Religion holds women back, or does it? Faith, the internet and improving the state of the world. Faith in the international trade and investment. Faith leaders, a secret weapon in the fight against diseases. Acknowledgement. Why use faith? Why use faith? Especially if you say, these people are a bunch of knuckle-dragging rubes who believe in cosmic Santa Claus. Why use faith? I think a worthwhile question. So I'm going to go ahead and say this. Mr. Harari, here's why. This is how they use religion to deliver their agenda. If the agenda becomes the message of the religion, the adherents are to adhere to the beliefs religiously. Are they not? Remember, we can't use our ethics and morals, so we'll use yours. Can't use our ethics and morals. Why? There are none. And so I must leverage yours. It's a manipulative tactic. This is how it starts. We're going to do this. I can use religion. Why? Because I want the adherents of the religion, if I can replace the core of it, to follow me as they would their God. Where have we seen this before? Let's take a look. I've been to 3 of these places. 2 have stood in exactly where they're at. Whenever objective ethics are pushed aside for man's morality, we have large impact cases like these to study. Germany, 6 million Jews and 5 million prisoners. Erwacht macht frei. Work will set you free. That's the sign that stands on the entrance of Auschwitz. Stood there, walked under it. Was going to use my picture. This one's better. Cambodia, 2 million Khmer. About a quarter of the country was killed in the 1970s in the Khmer Rouge Revolution. This was done brutally. Where else can we see this? In the gulags in Russia, 18 million passed through, 1.6 million of those died. In China, under Mao Zedong, an estimated 40 to 80 million people died from starvation, persecution, prison labor, mass executions. What are these? These are the belief systems of man. These are the belief systems that would say, I say, you do. If a religion is allowed to be infiltrated by man's thoughts, there is no ethic above my want. Might does make right. These are the logical outworkings of those types of faith. So when the WEF says it wants to create a new religion, I can promise you this one thing. It's not for your betterment, and it's not to free your mind. It's shackles that ends in either a firing squad or other way, gas chamber, whatever man decides. Without leaving us on that note, so why is this important? I'm calling and I would really ask for this as we read this passage. From Revelation 21:5 through 8, then he who sat on the throne said, behold, I make all things new. And he said to me, write, for these words are true and faithful. And he said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give of the fountain of water and the life freely to him who thirsts. He who overcomes shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. But the cowardly, unbelieving, abominable, murderers, sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and liars shall have their part in the lake which burns of fire and brimstone, which is the second death. We serve a God who not only gives us our source for transcendent ethics and purpose, but one who is sovereign over the universe. In the same way, despite the best efforts of man, which we've seen over the 20th century, and if you're like, yes, but that couldn't happen in our age, I'm looking around this room and know that there's maybe just a couple who weren't alive for the time of Cambodia. World War II gets farther and farther away, the atrocities that took place. Under Mao, that was, we're looking 50s, 60s, 70s. Cambodia was the 70s. I was there. When disco was in, this is when this took place. We are not that far removed. And the heart of man, as we look around, is not improving.
And look at Russia just mowing down Ukraine, destroying the whole country.
Mm-hmm.
It's
We hear wars. We hear rumors of wars. Man, I've seen what man's capacity and what he's willing to do to fellow man. The same way that with a religion and as Christians, what I would, and one of the things I appreciate most about this class, and with Michael and what he provides, so Michael, thank you so much. We stay anchored to this and we dive into this, a call to orthodoxy and returning to what does this say? Who does it say that we are and how hot we believe? That is what the world is missing, the good news, which is Christ's birth, life, death, resurrection, and how that gets applied to me. That is the good news. And with that understanding that we serve the God of the universe, the creator, and that it is rational and reasonable to believe. And that with that, having the confidence that our faith is placed in the one true God. So with that, I would say, I know we're wrapping up here at time. First, I would say, as a class, thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to stand and stunt double here for Michael as he takes a vacation, gets a little bit of time off, and know that we really, as a student here in this class, I genuinely appreciate not just his teaching, but then also with the ability to stand here to hear your thoughts every week and to learn from you as well. And to allow me to stand and to be here and just to stand in for a couple weeks, I truly appreciate it and thank you. With that, any thoughts on apologetics, anything we heard, nature of the world today? All right. So with that, I'll tell you what, let me go ahead, we'll pray to dismiss, and then we can go our separate ways. God, thank you once again for the opportunity to pour through your word. And Lord, we recognize and realize that having a faith in you, it is strong. Lord, it is earned so many times over on your part of us. God, we recognize you as the creator. We thank you for the opportunity to come together, to open your word, to read more about who you are. God, and for confirming within us once again who you are, but Lord, whose we are. We thank you, God, for the opportunity. We're careful to give you all the praise and glory. And as we go our separate ways, pray that you would keep us safely and that you would return us safely back next week. In your name, Jesus. Amen. Thank you, everyone.